2 years ago, when I was 13, my mother asked me to go downstairs to buy a loaf of bread. I nodded in agreement and stepped out into the street. It was a routine task, one I had done countless times before, but something about that day felt different. I was told the store had recently moved, so I set off in search of its new location, only to find it was still in the same spot. As I walked towards the store, the usual hustle and bustle of the neighborhood seemed strangely subdued. The street, typically lively with people and activity, was eerily quiet. I brushed off the feeling of unease, attributing it to a simple change in routine. I quickly bought the bread and began heading back home, still sensing an odd quietness that seemed to envelop the entire area. When I arrived back at our building, I noticed that the hallway was unusually dark, the lights flickering intermittently. The door to our apartment was slightly ajar, which was out of character for our usually meticulous household. I pushed it open and called out to my mother, but there was no response. The silence inside the apartment felt heavier than usual, adding to the growing sense of discomfort that had been with me all day. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, convincing myself it was just my imagination running wild. I placed the bread on the kitchen counter and went about my evening routine, but the strange occurrences lingered in the back of my mind. The quiet street, the darkened hallway, and the ajar door all combined to create an atmosphere of unsettling mystery that I couldn't quite understand or explain. The next morning, I decided to bring up the previous night's odd events with my mother. As I recounted the strange feeling I had, she looked at me with confusion, insisting she hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Her dismissive response did little to ease my growing sense of unease, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. A few days later, while walking home from school, I noticed a figure standing at the corner of our street. The person was dressed in a long, dark coat, and their face was obscured by the brim of a hat. They stood perfectly still, staring intently at the surroundings. The sight was unsettling, and as I approached, the figure suddenly turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. That evening, I found myself dwelling on the encounter. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the person I saw might have been connected to the strange sensations I had felt. The figure's sudden appearance and disappearance left me feeling anxious and suspicious. I began to question if they had been watching me, or if there was a connection between them and the unsettling quiet I had experienced. As I tried to make sense of the encounter, I became increasingly preoccupied with the idea that something was happening beyond my understanding. The strange figure and the odd sense of foreboding seemed intertwined, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection between the two. My sense of security was eroded, replaced by a gnawing worry that the events I had witnessed were part of something much darker and more troubling than I had initially realized. Months later, the unsettling events from that period began to coalesce into a more disturbing reality. I learned through a neighborhood grapevine that a resident, who lived just a few doors down from us, had gone missing around the same time. I felt that inexplicable discomfort. The news sent a shiver down my spine, and my mind raced back to the eerie figure I had seen on the street. Determined to understand what had really happened, I started asking questions around the neighborhood. I spoke with neighbors, tried to piece together any unusual occurrences, and revisited the places where I had felt uneasy. It became apparent that the missing person had been a regular at the local stores and had been seen on the same street where I had my unsettling encounter. The connections were too strong to ignore, and I began to suspect that the figure I saw might have been involved in something sinister. In my search for answers, I discovered that there had been several other unexplained incidents in the area around the same time. Reports of unusual activities, strange sightings, and unaccounted-for movements in the neighborhood began to surface. Each detail seemed to fit into a larger, troubling pattern that suggested a hidden and malevolent force at work. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that my experience was not an isolated incident. The eerie figure, the quiet street, and the missing neighbor were all pieces of a disturbing puzzle. My growing suspicion was that something deeply unsettling had been happening in our community, and the strange events I witnessed were part of a much larger and darker truth that was slowly being revealed. With the disturbing connections and unsettling discoveries mounting, I decided to confront the situation head-on. The anxiety and fear I had been feeling turned into a determined resolve to uncover the truth. Armed with the information I had gathered, I approached the local authorities and shared my concerns, presenting the details of my unsettling encounter and the strange figure I had seen. The police took my report seriously, but their investigation yielded little concrete evidence. The missing person's case remained unresolved, and the figure I had seen was not identified. The authorities were unable to connect the dots between my experience and the disappearance, leaving me with a sense of frustration and helplessness. Despite their efforts, the truth remained elusive, and the case grew colder with each passing day. Feeling that the official channels were failing, I continued my own investigation, delving deeper into the community's history and any past incidents that might shed light on the current situation. My research led me to discover a series of similar cases from the past, all linked to mysterious disappearances and eerie occurrences in the same area. This history of unsettling events painted a grim picture, suggesting that the neighborhood had been plagued by a darker, recurring problem. In the end, the experience left me with a profound sense of unease and unresolved mystery. The figure I saw, the missing neighbor, and the strange occurrences all pointed to a hidden truth that remained just out of reach. Although I was unable to piece together the complete story or bring closure to the case, the unsettling memories and the sense of dread stayed with me. The experience had transformed my perception of safety and normalcy, leaving me with a haunting awareness of the unknown that lurked just beneath the surface of everyday life.